I say? Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Good Shabbos. So happy to see so many of you here on Shabbat afternoon. I know several of you were at services last night and moved by Rabbi Stein, Abby Chava Stein. She shared with us how we are in the 7 weeks leading up to Rosh Hashanah, and they're called the 7 weeks of comfort, the Sheva Dinachemta. She taught us a lot of Torah last night, and this morning, and tomorrow at Out Memphis. At what time, Rabbi Dreyfus? Let's hear it for Rabbi Dreyfus, who had so much to do putting this all together. 11 o'clock, where? On Cooper, right? So my introduction is going to be very brief. I believe it's a Hasidic idea. Rabbi Stein has taught us Torah, will share Torah. But the rabbis say there's something even more important than teaching Torah or sharing Torah, and that's being Torah. And Rabbi Stein is Torah. Let's hear it for Abby.
We'll leave this for questions, I think, later. Yeah. Okay. Is it working? Can you all hear me? Amazing. I'm sorry for. Can you all see this? Because we were trying to make sure that everyone could see. There's some seats that could be distant over there. If you feel like going to sit on this side, you want to stay there. That's amazing. If you can't see, let us know. We could try to move it. We want to make sure everyone knows what's going on. Okay. Before I get going, I have some questions for all of you. The first question starts with, I love you all, but what is wrong with you? let me say what I mean. I just heard there's apparently a big tournament here. I honestly know nothing about sports. It happens when you grow up in a community with no sports. But I also know that there's a lot of things that each and every one of us could do on a Saturday afternoon. I know for me, that usually just includes a Shabbos shlof, as we would call it in Yiddish. It just means taking a nap. And it's very important. There's a Hasidic rabbi, who used to say that he's surprised that it's not one of the 10 commandments that you have to take a nap on Saturday afternoon. So I love you all, and I really appreciate all of you who came, but I would love to hear, let's get 3 answers. Try to make it really brief, like 1 sentence, if possible, of what brought you here. Because let me tell you something. I know I spoke yesterday from the Bima, and it looked like I had a podium, but you might have realized I was actually walking around. I have nothing against podiums, but I'm not a huge fan of talking at people. I like to talk with people. So I want to get a sense. We don't have time to hear. I wish there was time to hear from each and every one of you what brought you here. But let's get 3 answers. We have a mic here.
Raise your hand.
And just we'll take 3. What brought you here?
From reading your book.
Yes.
In all of you as a person from reading your book together with our book club.
Amazing.
Well, no, I was just...
Okay, great.
Barbara had her hand
I think
up.
we had a hand here.
Barbara?
Same thing. Okay.
Yeah, I read your book.
Amazing. Anyone else wants to share?
I wasn't here last night, but I'm fascinated to know how your folks accepted things, and I heard you didn't speak on that.
We'll talk a bit more about, we'll start out actually talking about the community I come from. We'll get to that as well. Yes,
Anyone
thank you.
else?
One more. We have a hand here? Or? Okay. Well,
My father's from Borough Park, too.
your father's from Borough Park.
Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. For those of you who might not know,
You were, yeah.
Borough Park is a neighborhood in Brooklyn, a Hasidic neighborhood in Brooklyn. My grandparents actually live there to this day. My grandfather is a Hasidic Rabbi there as well. Okay, I think we'll move on. We'll move on because I love you all, but I can't spend all the time listening to you all. Well, sorry, let me rephrase that. I actually can, just not the next hour and a half. After that, sure, we'll stay up here the whole night, right? Okay, I want to start by reading a small part of my book. If you haven't bought it, here's my shameless self-promotion. You should get it. There will be a link. Oh, it's actually up there. Very easy. tinyurl.com/becomingeve. You can also just Google it if you want. So I think you will all understand the context of this conversation a bit more in a few minutes when I dive into talking a bit about the Hasidic community, specifically the way they perceive gender and sexuality and so on. But a bit of context. This book in a chronological order goes from, well, in some ways from 1760, but mostly from my birth until 2012. And then the epilogue of the book jumps ahead by 3 years and describes my coming out to my dad. The part that I want to read is where after about an hour or so of trying to talk to my dad, who had never known that, well, even I didn't know the word transgender, even though knowing who I was, I had no words for it until I got online for the first time at age 20. My dad had never heard that term, didn't know that we exist really up to that moment. And this was at the home of a rabbi. You will see a video with him later towards the end of this presentation. And we were trying to explain to my dad, who I am, what I'm trying to do. We used a lot of religious texts, a lot of religious ideas talking about the soul. This is where I want to start reading. About an hour in of us trying to explain to him. Finally, I could see that Tati was beginning to grasp what we were talking about. Tati is how we call my dad. It's Yiddish for daddy. He still seemed confused, but now his expression seemed to shift into a glimpse of understanding. Impatient, I finally uttered the words I was desperate for him to hear. Tati, I said, looking him in the eye. Tati, I'm a girl. I'm a girl. I'd said it. Tati's eyes flew to the table, avoiding me, fumbling for words. For a moment, there was only silence. Then he spoke. But, he stammered, I don't get it. Men have a higher place in society. Men have better roles in the world. Well, why would you do that? Rabbi David paused for him. Rabbi David was the person in whose apartment I came out to my dad. Rabbi David paused for a minute, letting us all take this in. Then he said, your child is coming to you and telling you who she truly is. She wants you to see her for who her soul is. We both looked at Tati, but he still wouldn't make eye contact. More silence. Fine, I thought. Tati doesn't believe that it's possible. He's going to say that being transgender isn't possible, that trans people don't exist, and he will brush us off. After all, I had heard far less religious people say such things. I couldn't expect Tati to be any different. This time, however, Tati surprised me. Okay, yes, he said. It is possible that there are people in the world whose souls and bodies are different and it can be real. But you need a tzaddik, a righteous person who has a Holy Spirit within him to know that for sure. He seemed very sure of his assertion. Well, I've seen 2 therapists and a doctor who all agree with me that I am a girl, I told them. They're not tzaddikim, holy people, but they know it's true. And then came his ultimate clapback. But do you think that is okay with Judaism? He lamented. That's all I'm going to read for now. And if you're curious for more, you know what to do. But I want to focus on that for a second, and the reason why I chose that. We had my answers to him when he was asking, do you think that is okay with Judaism? But the reason why I wanted to start off with this is because to me, the strongest answer that I have to deal with, let's call it my daddy issues, is something like this. You're asking if it's okay with Judaism? All of you know this building. I think it's affiliated with something. What is it affiliated with? I think it's some religion. Do we have? Every time I walk into a Jewish space where people knew, I think you were all very much aware, at least basically, what the topic of conversation was going to be, and we're not just having this conversation in spite of being Jewish, or a Jewish conversation in spite of being part of the LGBTQ community. we're doing this out of an understanding that this is part of who we are. This is part of our mission in the world, and what the Nevi'im, what the prophets would call Or Lagoyim, a light that we understand that queer people, transgender people, LGBTQ people are not just happen to be a part of our community, but which is a reality whether you like it or not. We happen to be part of every community, whether it's Orthodox or Reform, whether it's religious or not, whether you like it or not. But more importantly, that we want to have this conversation as a Jewish community, that we want to be part of this. And to me, that is the strongest answer. Do you think it's okay with Judaism? The hundreds, literally hundreds of synagogues and temples and JCCs and other Jewish communities that I have stood in and engaged with people, and the literally thousands of Jews who I've interacted with one-on-one, not even counting online, who came to have this conversation, who came to be like, this is part of our community, this is a valued part of who we are, and this is so beautiful. So first and foremost, each and every one of you, just by being here, without listening to anything, without doing anything, is already sending a powerful message that this is part of who we are, this is part of our community, this is part of our life, and I'm grateful for each and every one of you for being here. Let's dive in a bit. I had some videos here, but I think all of you, which are just basic kind of like short profiles, but I think I'm not going to show them right now because I don't want to run out of time. If I run out of things to say, which is yet to happen, I will maybe come back to them. But they're all available online for any of you who want to look them up. If you just look me up on YouTube, there are playlists that have all of those interviews. So we're going to move on. Let's talk a bit about the Hasidic community. And I'm actually curious. We'll do again, like we'll take 3 answers. I'm curious what, if anything, some of you know about the Hasidic community. It could be something you know personally, like if your father unfortunately comes from Borough Park, or something that you have interacted with, something that you've watched online. There have been several projects of entertainment recently about the community, something you have studied. There is no right or wrong answer here. Again, let's try to keep them. Let's try to keep them brief. Tell me what you know about the Hasidic community.
I have read more than one book about women, one entitled Uncovered, who
Layla,
yes,
yeah.
who talk about how stifled they were in the Jewish community, in the Hasidic community, I should say.
Yeah. So talking about, we'll see that in a minute, how stifled women sometimes are in that community and so on. Yes, thank you.
Yes to that, but I also spent some time among a Hasidic community and found many of the women that I met within it to be some of the most beautifully spiritual people I have yet.
Is that Chabad?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Thank
no,
you for...
like, yeah, but I've done Chabad, but I'm Hasidic as well.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Thank you for bringing that up, but I want to point out, because in my experience has been that a lot of people who don't know the Hasidic, who are not part of the Hasidic community, the one Hasidic community a lot of people engage with and know is Chabad. I'm not saying this in any positive or negative way. I'm not here to talk about Chabad, but they are culturally radically different than the rest of the Hasidic world. There is a long list of cultural norms and things that you can separate between Chabad and the rest of the Hasidic world. Again, I'm not saying this is a positive or negative thing. I'm just saying it's very different than the way I grew up. I will say one other thing, and I'm glad you brought that up. Inevitably, there are going to be some generalizations. I'm not attempting here to say that this is how every Hasidic person experiences, this is how every Hasidic person is. You cannot generalize any community, not even a community that looks so black and white, because it isn't. I am sharing my own experience. I'm sharing my own family experience. I will say that my family wasn't considered necessarily like super radical within the Hasidic world. We were part of, for lack of a better term, royalty, or like part of rabbinic dynasties. We had different customs, a bit of different dress codes and so on. But as a general culture, I would say it's relatively the mainstream, and in many ways, parts of my family even set the standard of what is mainstream in the Hasidic world. We'll take one more if there is anyone else who wants to say something.
You always think of Jews as just really focusing on education. And the many books I've read, I was shocked that some don't go past 6th grade and can't speak English well, if they leave the Hasidic community, they're destined to fail.
We're going to get to that right now, but yeah, I didn't speak any English at all until I was 20. I didn't speak any English until I was 20, which is very common. Neither did any of my brothers. My sisters had a slightly better general education, but still not a full education. We'll get to that in a minute. So let me yes, go ahead.
I see my mentor, Rabbi Danziger, here. When we went to confirmation class in New York, we were on 42nd Street, and I saw all the Hasidim get off the bus to work.
At B&A, sure.
He was able to identify who the Satmars were, but I didn't. Those of you who go to Israel, you go to the Kotel, you think everyone's wearing different Bobby
You're
socks.
not going to say any Satmar people don't go to the Kotel, actually.
No, right. No, right. But I'd like understanding all these sects. We have such a superficial understanding of Hasidism through Chabad, God bless them, but if you could just give us the 101 and help us understand.
We're going to do that. That's what we're going to do right now. So yes, Chabad, again, I'm not saying it but just anything you think you know about the Hasidic movement, if you know that from Chabad, you don't have to forget it, just stick it with Chabad and keep it there. It is very, very different. I do not endorse the statement that I'm about to say, but I had a teacher who used to say Chabad is a religion very close to Judaism. And I think that's one of the weird things that some Hasidic people and some Reform Jews might agree on. I'm not personally endorsing the statement, I'm just quoting, but that is kind of how different Hasidic. But even the rest of it, I sometimes separate them between Hasidic people who wear fur hats on Shabbat and Hasidic people who don't, Chabad is the only ones actually who don't. But even within the ones who do wear the fur hats, there's still a lot of diversity, there's a lot of differences, and so on. But let's talk a bit. So let me go back, we'll get to the most gender segregated part in a minute, but a bit of the origins. Now, why do I say contemporary origins? And I think that is a very important detail. For those of you who were here last night, or maybe even this morning, I don't remember if I quoted anything, but you might hear me quote a lot of Hasidic teachings, and then you might be like, Abby, you don't seem to be a ginormous fan of the Hasidic community today, yet you keep quoting Hasidic texts. And I'm literally writing a book right now, and I would say a nice chunk, probably 20% of the texts in there are going to be Hasidic texts. Well, here's the maybe surprising to some, maybe not so surprising to others. The Hasidic movement today has very little to do with the original Hasidic movement. They will claim it does, but if you look, and I can share a link with anyone who wants. Earlier this morning, for those of you who are at the tech study, I shared a link with Sefaria, so if you go to that profile, you will see I have several source sheets that are focusing on those original Hasidic texts. And there are some texts that you start reading them, and it seems almost to be like those early Hasidic masters are fighting with the contemporary Hasidic movement. There are texts that quote, for example, of the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, someone that we actually know from historical text record who lived in the same house as the Baal Shem Tov, where he says, and I translate, but he says that in every generation, the God enlightens the minds of the smart people, of the Talmidei Chachamim, of the rabbis of that generation, to interpret the Torah according to the needs of that generation. This is a word-for-word translation from a Hasidic text. If I walk into a Hasidic synagogue today and I try to say that, hey, listen, every generation has their own interpretation, things change, we have to live with the time, so to speak, it literally sounds like the antithesis to what so many Hasidic communities and Hasidic movements follow. So it is very different. I sometimes say, half jokingly, Hasidic Judaism today has as much with Hasidic Judaism of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement 250 years ago, as Christianity has with Judaism. Uses some of the same texts, claims to be a direct continuation. It's very different. The contemporary origin specifically, and I'm talking culturally speaking, less so, sorry, give me just a second here. It's slightly annoying. I don't think so. It's okay. Hopefully it will behave. I'm just wearing the mic. The contemporary origin specifically, and a bit of it started before the Holocaust, but most cultural, not necessarily religious norms, but cultural norms, such as the segregation from the outside world, the very strict, unified dress code, and so on, Most of it happened after the war. Part of it was a direct response to the Holocaust, but part of it, and I think just as much, was a direct response to the reality that the majority of Hasidic people went from living in shtetls and small villages across Eastern and Central Europe to suddenly living in big cities, and starting in the end of the 1940s and 1950s, but also surrounded by really big Jewish communities who were majority not Orthodox, like places like in New York, in Israel, in London, in Canada, and so on. And in many ways, a lot of the Hasidic cultural norms were developed as a direct response to the threat of outsiders, and outsiders being the wider Jewish world. What they were trying to do is trying to recreate something that frankly never existed in the same way that they are perceiving it. They were trying to recreate the shtetls. Who wants to take a stab at explaining what a shtetl is? Not the literal translation, but what do you think a shtetl is when you think of shtetl? Can we get someone who maybe hasn't spoken up yet? Is that possible? Go for it. I love you, but I think we want to get as many people as possible.
A shtetl is a rather homogeneous insular community.
Do you want to hear something shocking? Shtetls were never homogeneous. There was, frankly, people in the shtetls were way less observant than your average, dare I even say, your average, or even definitely your average Orthodox Jews, forget about Hasidic Jews, your average Orthodox Jews today, sometimes. There was relative diversity. People did not dress in uniform. Like everyone dressed, but pretty much in local garbs. Like yes, the rabbis would wear long silk coats and have long beards, but that was not the case across the spectrum. But in the Hasidic mindset, they are envisioning this idealistic religious utopia, or I say dystopia, that supposedly existed in this like 18th, 19th century Pale of Settlement, small Eastern European shtetls. They envision a world, I don't know, where everyone eats gefilte fish on Friday night, chant on Shabbos morning, and so on. When I grew up in Yiddish, we had something that we would call in der Heim. It literally means back home. We would talk about, oh, in der Heim we did X, Y, and Z. In der Heim we did that. They were not talking about Israel. They were not talking about biblical or Talmudic times. They were talking about the 18th century, 19th century shtetls. And yeah, let's just ignore the part that we were literally killed pretty much every second day for who knows, whichever reason. But there is this idea of recreating this perfect world where everyone behaves in the same way, everyone dresses the same way, everyone's gender is the same, and everyone's sexuality is the same. No one steps out of line, and everyone follows all the rules. And as a result, they figured that given that they do live in major cities, at the time at least, and to this day, most Hasidic people live in big cities, they needed to segregate themselves from the outside world. That included stuff like shunning all outside media, newspapers. We lived in New York City my entire life. We never had a single English book at home other than maybe some textbooks from school, which even that was heavily censored. We didn't have TV at home or anywhere else. I had this conversation with someone yesterday, and I didn't realize that for kids who were in school in the early 2000s, that's quite surprising, but there wasn't a single screen. I went to school every day, and there wasn't a single screen to see anywhere. Forget about TV, computers, nothing. We had our own form of music and some newspapers that were all heavily censored. Any outside pop culture, anything that you would identify as culture from the outside was totally and absolutely forbidden. The education system, and some of you mentioned that before, was almost exclusively a Jewish education. There's some differences between boys' schools and girls' schools. I'm saying this in quotation marks. I do not think that everyone who went to a boys' school was a boy and everyone who went to a girls' school was a girl. That's a long conversation. I think we touched a bit on that whole topic this morning. But specifically those who went to boys' schools, you had almost no general education. I had from 4th to 8th grade, these were the only years that we had anything, so for 5 years, for 1 hour a day, even that only 4 days a week, we had what we called English, and that was supposed to cover English and math. English we covered pretty much to a 3rd grade level, but you need to realize this is not a 3rd grade level in a public school. This is a 3rd grade level for students who do not speak English at home or at school. So third grade level as English as a second language. So for any of you, I don't know if any of you have been through the Israeli education system, imagine about a third grade level in the Israeli education system, which for some of you might know, even an 8th grade level in the Israeli education system isn't amazing when it comes to English. But point being, no one spoke English. By the end of 8th grade, I don't think there was a single student who was fluent, forget about fluent, who was conversational in English. Math, we covered all the way up to long division. That was as far as it got, and that was it. There was no science at all, no social studies, no history of any kind. It wasn't on the curriculum, did not exist. Past 8th grade, there was no general education whatsoever. Starting in 12th grade, I was in school every day where we had 11 hours a day of study schedule, not counting prayers and meals, and that did not include a single text written in the Latin alphabet. It was all in Yiddish. We did. I would say my yeshiva was pretty much trilingual. The classes were given in Yiddish. Everything written was in Hebrew, which is something interesting, but not going to go into that. I learned from that time to write in Hebrew a lot. And we even studied Aramaic. I literally had Aramaic grammar classes, but that was it. Education, like everything else, is segregated by, as I say, perceived gender. A bit about my personal life. So I come from a very small standard New York family of 13. I have 12 siblings, 11 in-laws, and other sisters engaged, so we'll have 12 in-laws soon. My parents are, well, my dad isn't even 60, my mom just turned 60, they have over 60 grandkids. Both of my parents come from long dynasties of Hasidic rabbis. So a Hasidic rabbi is, let's confuse you all a bit. So a rabbi is not the same thing as a rabbi is not the same thing as a rabbi. In the Hasidic world, there are rabbis and there are rabbis. Some rabbis are also rabbis. The vast majority of rabbis are not rabbis. Some rabbis are not even rabbis. Point being, a rabbi is a scholar, someone who is educated, someone who has to go through, I went through about 30 hours of oral exams to get my ordination, someone who answers day-to-day questions on, is this kosher, is this not kosher, am I allowed to do this on Shabbat, am I not allowed to do this on Shabbat, and so on. A Rebbe is something different entirely. I sometimes call them ayatollahs. Ultimate supreme leader. I knew a lot of Rebbes growing up, including my grandfather, and I was by blood related to almost every Hasidic Rebbe in the world. A Rebbe is the one who is the ultimate supreme religious authority, both spiritually, religiously, but also communally and institutionally. The biggest Hasidic Rebbes in the world sit on average on assets usually going over $1 billion. Pretty much they are the CEO meets Pope meets King all in one. Sorry about this. This is really annoying. Let me try to take it off and just hold it.
Get it?
I think I got it.
Happens to us all the time.
I think I got it, but I need to get it out. No, I think Happy knows what to do. I'm just going to hold it. Thank you. Sorry about this.
Hold it.
I think I'm just going to take it out. Yeah, thank you. Sorry about this. It's just I hooked it up with something that could not sustain it.
Thanks, Happy.
Honest here, right? Okay. Is it working?
Yes.
Great. Okay. We'll just hold on to it. That is with the Rebbes. I personally was engaged at 17, married, well, technically 16, depending if you count the secret engagement part and the formal engagement part. We're not going to go into that. I was married at 18, had a son at 19, and then I was divorced by 21. So up to the divorce part, this is fairly standard in the Hasidic community. I said I'm one of 13, all 13 of us were at some point engaged, and most of them are still married. None of us reached 19. We were all teenage brides and grooms. Most of my siblings were teenage parents, myself included. Let's get back and focus a bit more on the gender segregation part. When I say the Hasidic community is the most gender segregated society in North America, frankly, I'm yet to learn about any community anywhere in the world that is more gender segregated than the Hasidic community I grew up in. I'm not saying all Hasidic communities are the same. I'm talking about the community I grew up in, but fairly standard within the Hasidic community. So what I want to do is I want to show a video. This is a video from the 90s. I apologize in advance if the quality is not so good, but I really like the video. First of all, I feel like I have the right to show it. It's two family weddings. But more importantly, you really, I think, get the message of what I'm trying to get across. So what I want to do, we're going to show the video, and then we're going to do again, we're going to take 3 responses, 3 questions, reactions just to this video. So we're not going to, not general, but just to this video. What I want us to try to focus on is to what are you picking up about gender roles, about maybe sexuality, about gender dynamics, and so on within the Hasidic community. Try really hard not to focus on the clothing and the music. Yes, I know there's a lot to say about that, but that's not what we're going to focus on while doing this video. Keep speaking. Comments, reactions, reflections, just on the video. We'll take 3.
Well, my first observation was that that poor bride was just standing there. She wasn't even dancing.
Very intentional. Very good observation. Yes, the bride was just standing there, not dancing, and that is very intentional, and I'll explain that in a minute.
Just 2 things. I didn't see any other women. It's only
Other
the brides.
what?
Other girls, other
what?
women.
What is that?
That's the way, I don't know.
What is that? What are you talking
It was
about?
only men. I only see men, and
Who
then I
else would
see
be there?
Exactly. And then I see the bride like a possession. Like, this is my property. This is gonna be mine, only mine.
It's not supposed to be a leash, even though it's not lost on me. The optics are not good. But yeah, we'll explain. Yes, go ahead.
In the beginning, it seemed like it was more about the family, about the dads.
These are the
like
grandparents.
They had accomplished something and they met their goal to get the daughter married.
So thank you for this, because the way people talk about weddings and the way I grew up talking about weddings, it was never A is marrying B or they're getting married. It was always the father, like person, whatever, is marrying his child. She's marrying her child. It was always like you're marrying off your kids as opposed to your kids are getting married. In this specific case, so let me give a bit of context here. So these are 2 separate videos. Both of them are weddings of the grandkids of my uncle, the Bubov Rabbi. So Bubov is one of the biggest Hasidic sects in the world. They originate from Western Galicia. The Huh? The Bubovers. The Bubovers, yeah, the Bubovers, yes. So he was the Rabbi who actually replanted it after the Holocaust. One thing I will say about him that I wouldn't say about a lot of Hasidic rabbis, he was a nice guy, which sounds like the bare minimum for a rabbi or a rabbi, but in the Hasidic world, unfortunately, it's not always a given. But this is fairly standard in the Hasidic world. I like the first part specifically for the point. It brings the rabbis into perspective. In that specific case, that was actually a wedding in Israel. It was his grandchild with the grandchild of the Vishnitzer Rebbe, who is actually the sect I grew up in, and which is the second biggest sect in Israel. They're so big that they have their own representative in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament. And then the second one is a wedding in Brooklyn. So at this second wedding, I actually was there. I was 4 or 5, and I think I remember it, but I don't know if I actually remember it. I just think I remember it because of the video. But so the mitzvaton specifically, and the reason why I feel like it's a good example, as we had a reflection, the bride isn't moving, and that is very intentionally. I have been to literally hundreds of Hasidic weddings between my cousins. My mom has 8 siblings, my dad has 10. All of them have 10 plus kids. They've all gotten married. So you make the calculations. I've been to hundreds of Hasidic weddings. This is how it looks at every Hasidic wedding. Not every Hasidic wedding looks like a stadium. This is more if it's the equivalency of a royal wedding, but this setup for mitzvatons is common at every Hasidic wedding. If there's ever a bride who dances along, the video goes around on Hasidic social media, which is usually just WhatsApp groups because all the social media is forbidden. And it's like, oh my God, this bride was dancing along at her wedding, dancing with her grandfather. What's more interesting here, even according to the most strict interpretation of Orthodox law, there is nothing. It's 100% allowed for him to dance with his granddaughter, biological granddaughter, holding hands in public. Even there's nothing prohibiting it. It is just considered taboo to do it in public. So it's the part where we see culture becoming really strong and sometimes overpowering what is perceived as religion and as law. And that will come up a lot more in a minute. Now, the reason the bride isn't moving and the reason why you mostly see men, there are women. It's usually 3 sides men and 1 side women. So I'm not even going to focus on the fact that it's separate and extremely unequal, which I think is to be expected in patriarchal societies, but it goes beyond that. It goes beyond the society that makes rules for women without women being in the room. I mean, I know an entire party in this country who loves to do that. That's not necessarily so unique. It is that women are, in many ways, observers in their own country. Sorry, not their own country, in their own community. And this is a very good example. Now, there are events that are for women by women, and they're just for the women. But anything that is community-wide, it's not that the women are beyond the mechitza, beyond the wall. It is that I went to synagogue 3 times a day as a child, and I never, ever remember anyone stopping the service and being for a minute, how are the women doing up there? Maybe you should check. Like, are they following along? Like, do they want to nothing. It is non-existent. And this is a very good example, a very good visual of that. Women are not allowed to dance in front of men, ever. It is immodest. If a man gets impure thoughts, women are taught that if a man gets impure thoughts because for watching a woman, then it's the woman's responsibility because, hey, we just love, blaming women for what men do, apparently. Women are perceived as sexual objects. It's not said. I've never heard a rabbi standing up and saying women are sexual objects, but the entire community revolves around an understanding that women are sexual objects, and it's their responsibility to keep men from, having impure thoughts. Women also are never perceived as having any sexual agency or desire. There's never a thought of, yes, but there are women in this room. Maybe some of the women are going to find some of the men attractive and get turned on and have impure thoughts. No one ever talks about it. And they don't care. Like, it's never taken into consideration. At the same time, men are never sexualized. Men are not sexual objects. And men have a lot of sexual agency. They're just always horny. I don't know if that's inaccurate, but at least it is how the community is run on a day-to-day basis. Now, obviously, we'll do questions later. Obviously, this totally ignores queer people. I'm aware of a lot of women who went to women's-only schools who were very attracted to other women, and I wouldn't say that I was necessarily a boy at a boys' school being attracted to other men, but I had a boyfriend in yeshiva. I just never considered myself a boy, which is a separate conversation. But I'm aware of other people at my all-boys yeshiva, my all-boys school, who did stuff with other boys. But it's never discussed. Gender and sexuality are black and white, and the entire community and society revolves around that. Weddings are arranged, usually at a very young age. And divorce is extremely frowned upon. Now, I think that's a very important detail. The amount of times I've heard people tell me, but look, it's working in the Hasidic community. They only have like, well, when I was a child, it was a 1%, but now it's up to like a 10, 15% divorce rate compared to like 50% divorce rate. So here's the thing, but I always like to tell people that divorce to me doesn't mean a good marriage ended, it means a bad marriage ended, so it's actually a good thing. But also, it's frowned upon. And that is the case in almost every community that practices, actually, as far as I'm aware, every community that practices arranged marriages frowns upon divorce. And I think that is a very important detail when keeping in mind and thinking, oh, arranged marriages work. I'm like, does it really work, or are people just extremely discouraged from ending marriages that really don't work? I want to say one final detail, and I'm not going to dive into a lot, but I would encourage all of you to look up Unchained at last. And something that I find surprising that a lot of people don't know. But at the moment, in 40, I would say I'm very proud because by the time when I made this slide originally, it was 48 states, now it's down to 43 states. But in 43 states in the United States, child marriage is perfectly legal. Some states, around 20-something states, there is no bottom limit for marriage. Some states have some restrictions, and some states a judge needs to sign off. Between 2013 and 2020, close to 1 million underage people got married in the US. The vast majority of them were underage girls to adult men, very often used as a way to get away with sexual assault and rape. So I'm not going to dive into that, but this Unchained at Last was actually founded by a friend of mine who also grew up Hasidic and has left, and it's working to both support women who are escaping arranged marriages and to work on policy to change that. And they've had quite a lot of success over the past 5 years, where it's now been outlawed in 7 to 8 states. That is enough. I think we're going to stop here about the Hasidic community. Maybe we'll come up a bit more later, and I want to move on. How many of you were at the tech study this morning? Okay, so your opinions matter to me a lot, but for this specific exercise, you don't need to participate because I think you will know the answer to that. But everyone else, raise your hand. Everyone else, everyone, raise your hand, everyone, raise your hand, raise your hand. Great. Here's what I'm going to do. Keep your hands up, if you can. I'm going to start saying numbers. And we're talking here about how many gender identities you think traditional Judaism recognizes. If you think there are only 2, and by traditional Judaism, I don't mean what you think your Jewish identity, your Judaism. Take whatever you think of the Bible, of the Talmud, a Judaism that you would perceive as traditional Judaism hundreds of years ago. How many gender identities do you think it recognizes? If you think there are just 2, put down your hand. If you think it's 2 and not more, put down your hand. Now I'm going to keep going up. Whenever you hear, you think it's 3, put down your hand. If you think it's 4, 5, how many of you still think there's 6 or more? Okay, we all need to become friends. I love you all. There are at least 6, I think it's 8, but that depends on exactly how you interpret it, or even more, different gender identities. Now, when I say gender identity, I'm not actually talking about people's genitals. We're talking about gender in a very similar way to the way we think about it today. We're talking about gender in the concept of what is someone's responsibility in society, what is someone's role in society, what they have to do, what they can do, and so on. And this Mishnah, for those of you who were at the text this morning, you saw this already, but it's a very powerful one, and from what I just saw, only a few of you were there. So I would love to give a volunteer to read this Mishnah. Anyone? Go.
An androgynous is like a man in some ways and like a woman in some ways, like both a man and a woman in some ways, and neither like a man nor a woman in some ways. Rabbi Meir says androgynous is a gender category of its own because the rabbis could not decipher whether they are a man or a woman. However, a tumtum is not so, as at times they are fully male and at times they are fully female, but we cannot tell which.
Thank you. If I would create a meme or like a survey and I would put on these texts and it would say, some people are sometimes male, sometimes female, sometimes both, sometimes none, and you know what, here's a radical opinion. Some people do not fit on this gender binary altogether. And I would ask you, do you think this is a text from the 21st century or from the 2nd century? My guess is going to be that most people will be like, oh, it's the 21st century, and if they are not fully on board, they will be like, what is this like progressive nonsense, and like who came up with this and whatever. What I just paraphrased is a 2nd century text. Now, I said this morning, and I'll say it again. For me, I don't want to ignore that this is a Jewish text. I don't want to ignore that this is a text that is part of my tradition and what our ancestors and teachers have grappled with for hundreds and thousands of years. But forget about religion for a second. This is someone writing in the 2nd century. Even academics and historians, there's a lot of conversations and debates exactly when the Torah was written and who wrote it and so on. I haven't seen anyone disagreeing that the Mishnah was written in the 2nd century, maybe the 3rd, the latest. And these are people who have an understanding of gender, of sexuality, of identity that goes far beyond a lot of people today. I'm not saying it was perfect. I'm not here trying to, I said that last night, I'm not advocating for a Talmudic way of life and that was perfect. I just think, to me, this isn't surprising. I think, to me, this is simply part of the Jewish tradition of living with reality, living with the realization that we need to live with reality. And the reality is that you cannot, gender is not black and white, and sexuality isn't black and white. And this isn't a unique example. This is one of, in the entire Talmud, you have hundreds of examples in different contexts and in different places where they talk about gender beyond just male and female. I will do 2 more texts and then we'll move on, but just to give some examples. This is one of my favorites. This is a poem written in the 13th century by a rabbi in the name of Cloinimus ben Cloinimus, a Jewish poet who might be one of the most canonized medieval Jewish poets. In the traditional prayer books for the high holidays, you get their poetry. There's some of their poetry recited during Ne'ilah. We're not just talking about a minor rabbi who wrote a piyut here and there. We're talking about someone who has really written a lot and whose piyutim, his poetry and writings, have really been used to this day. And this is what they are writing. Any volunteers to read this? Here, I will just give you. Anyone? Just reading it?
It's in the Aramaic.
The original is kind of in Aramaic. This is a translation, though.
Here.
Oh, she got it.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jeff.
Yeah. Actually, give it to her. She will read the next one. So give it to her.
I'm going to give her the microphone.
Okay. Go for it.
What an awful fate for my mother that she bore a son. What a loss of all benefit. Cursed be the one who announced to my father, it's a boy. Oh, but had the artisan who made me created me instead a fair woman. Today I would be wise and insightful. We would weave, my friends and I, and in the moonlight spin our yarn and tell our stories to one another. From dusk till midnight, we tell of the events of our day, silly things, matters of no consequence. On holidays, I would put on my best jewelry, I would beat on the drum, and my clapping hands would ring. And when I was ready and the time was right, an excellent youth, husband, would be my fortune. He would love me, place me on a pedestal, dress me in jewels of gold, earrings, bracelets, necklaces. And on the appointed day, in the season of joy when brides are wed, for 7 days would the boy increase my delight and gladness. Were I hungry, he would feed me well-kneaded bread. Were I thirsty, he would quench me with light and dark wine. He would not chastise nor harshly treat me, and my sexual pleasure he would not diminish. Every Shabbat and each new moon, his head would rest upon my breast. The 3 husbandly duties he would fulfill, rations, raiment, and regular intimacy, and 3 wifely duties would I also fulfill, watching for menstrual blood, Shabbat candlelights, and bread.
Thank you. That is followed by this prayer.
Father in heaven who did
Is
miracles.
it working? Go for it.
Father in heaven who did miracles for our ancestors with fire and water, you changed the fire of Chaldees so it would not burn hot. You changed Dinah in the womb of her mother to a girl. You changed the staff to a snake before a million eyes. You changed Moses' hand, leprous white, and the sea to dry land. In the desert you turned rock to water, hard flint to a fountain. Who would then turn me from a man to a woman? Were I only to have merited this, being so graced by your goodness? What shall I say? Why cry or be bitter? If my Father in heaven has decreed upon me and has maimed me with an immutable deformity that I cannot remove, and the sorrow of the impossible is a human pain that nothing will cure and for which no comfort can be found. So I will bear and suffer until I die and wither in the ground. And since I have learned from the tradition that we bless both the good and the bitter, I will bless in a voice hushed and weak. Blessed are you, O Lord, who has not made me a woman.
Thank you. I don't think I need to add a lot to this, but when I read that poem the first time, and I'm like, yes, it buys into a lot of maybe gender stereotypes, but it felt a lot to me like watching a coming out YouTube vlog, which is something that trans people love to do. I assume now it's on TikTok, but it sounds like someone really expressing their deepest feeling, their deepest emotion, something that was very relatable to myself. For those of you who have read my book, you might remember that I had my own prayer. I was unaware of this one, but when I was 9, I wrote a prayer, and I translated that in the book as well, of something similar. I want to wake up as a girl. As far as I can tell, this person was not influenced by Hollywood or the media or any other modern idea, unless if they could time travel, but I'm unaware of that. Once again, to me, a lot of pride as a queer person, as a Jewish person, but this also written and published in the 13th century. And I will do one final text, which is also very personal to me. This screenshot, I mentioned before coming out to my dad, and we showed him some text. So this screenshot is literally what I showed him. So this is a text from a Hasidic Rabbi of the first generation of Hasidic rabbis, Rabbi Chil Mechel of Zlotchev, who also happens to be my direct ancestor, 7 times great, whatever, grandfather, you all get it. And I'm not going to go into the whole text, but just this brief. At times, a female would be in a male body because in the reasons of Gilgal, which is reincarnation, the soul of a female would come to be in a male. If you relate to a soul in a Shema, go with that. If you want, replace soul with identity, which is simply what Hasidic people perceived as who you are is your soul. Your identity beyond your body is your soul. Again, writing in the 18th century. So when I said before that when I look at some Hasidic communities today and I'm like, you do not sound very Hasidic to me, this is one of the many examples where Hasidic Judaism originally had a wide and, dare I say, open and progressive view of humanity, understanding that people and who they are more important than maybe some very rigid rules and laws. Now, I want to open up the questions in a minute, but I want to share one final thing. So last night, we spoke how much I hate tolerance and love celebration. Except for lactose. No, I'm lactose intolerant. I'm also allergic to peanuts, anyone who cares. But, so I might lack tolerance to nuts. But when it comes to people, I don't like tolerance. I like celebration. And I want to share a video, which is just one of many examples, but it's my own personal bat mitzvah. So how many of you had a bar mitzvah, traditionally that boys have? How many of you had a bar mitzvah? Okay. How many of you had a bat mitzvah? How many of you had both? Telling you I'm a super Jew. But I want to share this. The whole video is like half an hour. I'm not going to share the whole thing, but I just want to share a small segment of that. Just because to me, I think that's an example of the kind of community and the kind of world we can actually have.
In our tradition, leaving Egypt wasn't a historical event alone. In our tradition, leaving Egypt was a personal, existential leaving as well. Whenever we leave a narrow place, a place of constriction, painful servitude, a place where we are not authentically who we are, that leave-taking, that transitioning is an exodus, is a freedom walk. And so this moment spirit of all those who have walked from a narrow place into an expansive place be with you. May the signature of the one who is known as eminence, the one who is known as truth, be with you as you have now embraced, first to yourself and now in Kahal Rav amongst those who love you and know you. Embrace the truth of who you are and the joy of who you are. Abigail.
Sorry, I'm just trying to fix this again.
Amen.
We'll get to that in a second. To me, this is just an example, one of many, of the kind of world that we can actually have. I don't know what any of you think, but to me that looked very Jewish, maybe a bit too Jewish according to some people who watched it. This is grounded within our tradition. As I said last night, I'm not on a mission to get people to be more religious, to get people to be less religious. I'm not here to tell queer people that this is how you have to do it, otherwise you're not real. I'm here to show that this is a possibility. This is a kind of Judaism that we can create, grounded in our tradition and as part of our communities. And I'm happy to say that I have seen many of those happen since, before that. When I created it, I pretty much created a ritual from scratch, based on a few things that I could find that existed before. But it's something that I hope, just like, 1 week there's a kiddush for a bar mitzvah, for a bat mitzvah, before a wedding, someone graduated, and then someone came out, and we're doing a kiddush. And it's a normal part of who we are as a community. I want to say one final thing, and I think this is a bit important. One of the common questions I used to get when I started doing, and this is different every time, I tweak a bit based on the community, obviously, but I've shared some of those messages many times before. And people always tell me then, so what's going on? You go on Twitter or on social media or anywhere online, and you start to realize that too many people claim what we would call, yet last night we called that the boogeyman in the sky. Too many people claim that God hates blah, blah, blah. God wants that and that. Now listen, for most of those people, what I want to say, I don't know who your God is, but I do not believe in your God, and I don't give a damn what you think your God says. But that's not just the point. Because I sincerely don't think that what's standing in the way of the LGBTQ community is religion. Again, I'm not here to tell you organized religion is perfect, you all should become. I expect you to see you here every Friday night. Though I think the rabbis here would like it, and that's great. If you want to come every Friday night, please do. But that's not the point that I'm trying to make. I do think that a lot of people use religion and their dogma to justify who they are, to justify their hatred for the other, for something that does not fit into their very narrow view. It is not by chance, and I let you all look up the statistics, but you are going to find that about the same groups of people tend to be sexist and racist, also homophobic and transphobic and hate outsiders and hate people who speak different languages. it's not like those people just go and decide like, okay, who can I hate today? Or maybe they do, I'm not sure. But the point is that what we're dealing here with legitimately with intolerance, with people who don't want to listen to other people and to see other humans as humans, to see other people as people. And I think we need to keep that in mind when we want to think of how do we hopefully push forward. Right now it feels like a very hard pushing sometimes, but how do we get there? Let's take some questions. We're gonna, a microphone go around. Can I let you choose?
Sure.
Okay, great. That way, Rabbi Dreyfus is the boogeyman and not me.
Has anybody not spoken yet? Let's start with people who haven't spoken. Sure, please.
I don't. Oh, okay. I see you don't have to answer everything, but do you have a relationship with your son, and what about with your family?
My son is one of the few things I do not like to talk about in public. We have a joint custody agreement, that's as much as I would say. My family, I have a very good relationship with one brother. I have a chattable relationship with one sister, as in we chat every now and then. And then I would say I have about 10 to 15 of my first cousins that I talk with. Now, what I always tell people is I could choose to focus on my 10 siblings and my 60 whatever nieces and nephews and my hundreds of first cousins literally who do not speak to me. But instead I focus on the two I do, the 10 to 15 cousins who I have very good relationships with. And listen, most people my age I know, 2 siblings, 10 cousins, that's a very big family. So I try to focus on that. Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, if I have it. So first, I just wanted to go back to the wedding scene. What struck me the most is that it all seems very transactional, and it's almost like 2 families or 2 companies or corporations celebrating a merger. And the last thing you want after you have a successful merger is to have it fall apart. So maybe, contributing to part of like the taboo of divorce, even when it really should happen for the betterment of the people involved. That was my comment.
I definitely want to say to this, though, and it's not always the case, but for any of you, if any of you are study European royal history and you realize all those weddings were all like, Queen Victoria marrying off her kids to like literally every royal family in Europe, there are Hasidic families who literally do that. And to give one example, so you saw before in that video 2 people dancing, and one of them was my uncle, and the other one, who is the visitor from Israel, he has his son, as I said, is the 2nd biggest Hasidic Rabbi in Israel. He has a daughter that's married to the Belz Rabbi, who is the 3rd biggest Hasidic sect. He has another daughter that's married to the Satmar Rabbi, arguably one of the biggest Hasidic sects in the world, and another daughter that's married to the Rebbe of Nusker, which is also one of the biggest. In other words, he literally did that. And you have a point where the 4 biggest Rebbes, who combined probably have a following of 250,000 people, are brother-in-laws. So, yes.
So my question, and again, obviously you don't have to answer, when you and your spouse divorced, did you give your spouse a get?
Oh, she was engaged before that even. It was complicated, but we got divorced right away. We were divorced 3 months after we got separated, and she was married again 3 months later.
Okay.
Other questions?
Looks like there's a lot of microphones.
Just a basic question. In an arranged marriage, does the 18 or 19-year-old have any way to opt out?
You're going to have to define anyway, because it's not like the family has government control. So if a kid decides to leave, which does happen, then
they just put another one.
They leave. Let's put it this way: if you want to stay in the community, not really. If you're leaving, you're leaving, which is extremely hard on its own. But if you want to stay in the community, you better do what mommy and daddy says and get married. I'm not saying there are some times where people stay no, but you have to realize it, in all honesty, to zoom out for a second, is that your average 18, 19-year-old in the Hasidic community doesn't know anything else. People ask me a lot, if you knew who you were, I knew who I identified since I was 4, why did you get married? And I'm the whole question comes from a basis of this was some kind of decision. When I turned 18, now I'm going to get married. It is, I tell people, you know, you eat, you breathe, you turn 12 or 13, you have a bar bat mitzvah, you turn 18, you get married. It is what you do, it is what we're taught from an extremely young age, and that is kind of like, it's the logical, almost the natural next step in life. So it isn't something that I would say a lot of people even think about. And it's not like there's most, I would say the vast majority of Hasidic teenagers do not socialize across gendered communities. So like, it's not like you have options, it's not like you know anything else. It happens, all of those things happen. There are people who say no, there are differences, but as a whole.
I have an amorphous question that I'm trying to put into specific words. But first, my kids and I watched last night, and it was really meaningful, so thank you. We recently, my 14-year-old, one of his best friends recently came out as trans, and I was completely floored because it took a while for Samuel to want to tell me and my husband, and of course you don't know my family and I, but I would have never thought that they would think that we would have been anything but thrilled for this friend. And so I said, well, why don't you think Susie doesn't want to tell us? And he said, because you're religious. And I thought, well, I know how we've raised you, I know where he's grown up, but just this idea that, I mean, and it connected to me to what something that you were saying last night about tolerance versus celebration. And I thought that it's clear that we are celebrating in our family when people come out as whatever, but it was clear not, right? And maybe because of like the wider community, but so my thought I'm trying to form into a question is like, what do we need to do Jewishly to make more clear that we are celebrating, right?
Yeah.
Rather than tolerating.
But first and foremost, I think you already alluding to a point that's very important is like, we cannot assume. Because specifically if you are a religious community, I do think it depends where you are. Like if you live in New York, literally every church and synagogue has like a giant pride flag during June. So I think the assumptions in New York might be very different than the assumptions here about religious communities. But there definitely is a general assumption out there that if you are part of a religious community, then, you know, you might have some. Versus for me, when I showed this video, I'm like, I'm part of a community, and that's why I had this amazing party you don't see here the kiddush that followed, which was one of the biggest that I've ever seen in the community, and it was fully covered by the community as a whole. And like, we had this really beautiful party. But that isn't, unfortunately, what a lot of people think. And I think as communities, we need to go out of our way to make sure that we include that. I literally passed Rabbi Dreyfus' office a minute ago and saw the LGBTQ Safe Zone sticker, which is a good start. So like, I think it's very important to have visual signs. Like, I tell communities a lot, if you're a community where a queer person, an LGBTQ person is not gonna feel comfortable year-round, do me a favor, don't do a Pride Shabbat. But if you are the kind of community that does, and you have a clergy that want to celebrate and that want to be, that's not enough. Even saying it on a day-to-day basis, you need to do something big. Because then, again, only do that if you are actually a community that's going to do that. But yes, put up those Keshet Safe Zone stickers. Put up fireflies.
We have a Keshet in the Danziger chapter.
Amazing. Oh, wow.
There have been we've actually had a trans B'nai Mitzvah here at Temple.
There you go. Yeah, and
people may not know it in the community, but we have.
Well, but what might be a good idea, maybe put it on the website, like make it well known. Like, the amount of times I travel a lot, and I always like to go on a Friday night or Shabbat morning, I like to go to a service, and I like to go to a local community, and one of the first things I would look is see if they say something on their website. And it doesn't take more, and I know Keshet has some like standard Keshet, which we mentioned last night during service. Keshet is a national Jewish LGBTQ support group. They're even international by now. There's Keshet in Germany and in other places. But put a statement on your website. It might feel very performative, but if it's your community really is accepting, and the same thing on an individual basis. I tell people always that you can never underestimate how powerful sharing something on social media could be. And you might think, I have 100 followers, who is it going to matter? you can never know who is going to be the child, who is going to be the teenager in the background, who is going to see it and be like, oh, this is someone I can talk to. It is very important to have that. And I would, just as a story, for my own personal example, before I came out publicly, I was at a place where I felt like I want to talk to some friends, but I'm not like ready to come out publicly. And what I meant by friends, I've already had a lot of LGBTQ friends, but I want to talk to a friend who is just a friend, who is not part of the LGBTQ community, but who would be safe to talk to. And I had this conversation. There was a staff member at the Columbia Hillel, the Jewish Student Center where I was studying at the time, who was also, she was a queer rabbi. And I asked her, what do I do? Like, who can I know who to trust? So this was the summer of 2015. So it was a few months after the Supreme Court decision that legalized gay marriage and everything. And some of you might remember that a lot of people used the rainbow filters on their profile photo. Now, I have no idea how many people were like, oh, I'm going to put a rainbow filter because maybe I have a friend who wants to know that if I'm a safe person to talk to, so I'm going to put that on. I was going to guess that a lot of people just put it on because it felt cool. But she's like, just go on Facebook and check, see. And chances are that if you see with one of your good friends that they have had that rainbow filter, they're probably someone you can trust. And she was right. I came out to a first friend that she was beyond amazing, and her first reaction was, so we're going to go, we're going to do a girls' night where we're going shopping, right? And like taking you out, which was an amazing, like really amazing reaction. She is a cisgender, straight girl from an Orthodox background. But yeah, so like these small things that might feel like it's not going to matter, but these small, specifically visual things could have a very strong impact.
My question is, when you were marrying at 18, did you know you didn't want to do that?
We discussed this for a bit before. I didn't know, period. Meaning I knew who I was, but I didn't know about other options. I had no words for what I was feeling. I thought I was the only person on the planet who felt like that. I had no I didn't know anything else. It's what we all wanted to do. And frankly, at the time, I wanted to do it just because that's what I was conditioned to do. Like, you turn 18, you want to get married. If you turn 20 and you're still single, you start feeling old and like whatever. So like, you want to do that. So yeah, it wasn't something that I gave a lot of thought as like, what are some other options? I did think a lot during that process. I mentioned that last night, like during the engagement and later during the wedding, like literally as I was standing under the chuppah and there was like the bride, going around 7 times, and I'm thinking, oh, the roles are reversed. That's the one memory I remember having. But yeah.
So in the book, you were always very curious, always, never wanting to take this is how it is. You always wanted to read further and further and further, and that was amazing. And so I'm wondering, once you left the community, what kept you in Judaism? Had you already done the research when you were out at Columbia and everything, done the research and seen that Judaism could be accepting in the Mishnah from the 2nd century, or what was it, these safe zone spaces? But because you were kind of a clean slate and you could have gone anywhere. I mean, I had a moment like that in my life where I was like, okay, this is it, I'm new, what do I know about myself? And I did say, I know I'm Jewish, but what kept you?
The short answer is nostalgia, but let me get a bit more into this. So there was a 2-year period where I would say I wasn't Jewish. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. This is all BS, leave me alone. The first Yom Kippur after I left, I arranged a camping trip for myself and several other people who have left the Hasidic community. We created a menu with as many parts of a pig we could possibly get on a menu, and that's what we did. Point being, I was really at this point where I didn't want to have anything to do with any of that. It started out with small things. I would say it started with some of the biggest things were things that I really liked and really missed, and at the time there was a lot that I missed, whether it was the food and the music and certain parts of the spirituality and so on. There was also my love for like text, and like I felt like I have all these like years of knowledge where that's all I studied, and I'm just gonna disregard everything. I have all of it. I can go write books about it now, which apparently is what I'm doing. But also like, why wouldn't I do that? And it took me a while, I think, to get over the initial, what was a trauma, like was really traumatic. And I think after 2 years, I started exploring. I wouldn't necessarily say that I went back. I wouldn't consider I went back to the Judaism. My Judaism today has little to nothing to do with the Judaism of my parents. My dad literally told me once that he would rather prefer that I do that Yom Kippur with the parts of the pig rather than going to a synagogue that has mixed seating. So frankly, what I'm doing today, when I go to synagogue on Rosh Hashanah, it is not compared to what I know from a lot of people my age. It's like my parents are going to get very angry if they go. Frankly, my parents get very angry if I go to where I go to services on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So it wasn't based on that. I would say, let's put it this way. If I have to imagine a circle, I started out at point 1. I made a 180-degree turn. I got very angry. I destroyed that whole circle. Then I picked up some pieces and created my own. And it started out with, again, like some smaller things. One of the things that really helped me is candlelighting on Friday night, which I do not do necessarily. Has very little relation with sunset. Sometimes it's before, sometimes it's after. So it's not done in the way I was raised as a religious thing. But so specifically, I started that about 7 years ago. So it was before I came out. There was a time when I struggled with addiction, and then I became sober. And then there was a period that was actually the worst period of my life, specifically because I didn't have what I used as an escape with addiction, and then, but also I hadn't come out yet, and there was all these like struggles, and I was at a really bad place, and I needed something that I felt I needed something to ground me. So I took on Shabbat, Friday night, and I was like, every Friday night I'm gonna light candles, and I'm gonna do something for Shabbat. That something could be a dinner, a Shabbat dinner, it could be going to a service, it could be going to a movie with friends, it could be going to a bar, it could be a lot of things, but I have to do something. Friday night is not the same as Thursday night, it's not the same as Monday night. Friday night is different, and that can look in different ways. And at the time, I didn't even think that I was doing it for anything religion or Jewish related. For me, it was like a mental health practice. Which frankly, though, when I think about it, I do think that that is what Shabbat is about. It is about that moment of stopping. It is about that moment of making that day different. And I would say ever since, I haven't missed a week in over 7 years. I literally have this like bag that I travel with. I travel a lot. And among my different kind of makeups and perfumes and shampoos and everything, there's a small bag with candles and a lighter. So I don't show up at a place and I don't have candles. And I have come almost full circle with that because I used to use it when there was like nothing going on in my life and everything sucked, to a point where there's sometimes so much going on and I need that break for that. But these are all like, the way I see Judaism is the way I see people. I'm not observant. I'm not shomer anything. I celebrate. In Hebrew, there's a difference between Shemirat Shabbat and Chagigat Shabbat. To me, there's observing and there's celebrating. I do not look on Judaism and like, oh, this is a list of things I have to observe. If there is something that I only have to do because I have to observe it, I feel like here I can say that, then I just don't do it. But if it's something that feels like celebrating, then I do that. And for any of you, if any of you want slightly more self-promotion a bit, if you care, if you check out my Instagram, you will see I cook a lot. On an average Friday night, I cook a 5-course Shabbat dinner, very traditional food. And people ask me sometimes, like, why do you do that? And I'm like, because I like it. And I think that is the strongest reason. Why do I celebrate holidays? Like, are you religious or not? I'm like, I do that because it works for me, because it gives me meaning in life, and I enjoy it. Which frankly, I think, having studied, I wouldn't say I'm the most knowledgeable Jewish person, but I have studied and I have a letter to prove it, that I know a bit of what's going on. And I think that is what Judaism is at its core. I think we can take 2 more questions.
Rabbi Harry Danziger.
Thank you, Rabbi Evie. For those of us who are my age or maybe a little less, can you give us some insights into the kinds of things that we should not say or ask, usually in good faith and not realizing?
Thank you, and that is very important. And a lot of people think that it's like, oh my God, you're just giving me a lot of rules. You can't say that, you can't say that. So there's 2 simple things to think about. I always tell people, think of, would you say that to someone who is not part of that group? So you meet a trans person, you're like, which kind of question are you going to get? Would you ask that question from someone who isn't trans? As far as I'm aware, no one goes around asking people what they have in between their legs, so don't ask trans people. It is not complicated. It's like requires to stop for a second, have kavanah, have intention, and think, would you ask that question? I think the same goes for gender, for sexuality. I think the same goes for race, for ethnicity, people of different countries, people of different socioeconomic backgrounds. Just stop for a second and think, would you ask that same question? I sometimes, when I talk specifically in non-Jewish settings, I don't think I will say that in the Jewish setting, but I sometimes tell people, would you ask that from a white, Protestant, Anglo-Saxon man? If not, do not ask the question. That's not always the case, but it is simply thinking of, would you ask that question from someone who is not part of that group? I do think at the same time it's important not to be like stepping on like walking on coals when talking to a person. So I think the most important thing is to try to be conscious and let, specifically if you don't know what to ask, a good piece of advice is to let that person kind of like run the conversation and just think before asking questions. And it's not that complicated. I would say there's a lot of people that I don't understand, a lot of things that I don't understand, and that is the rule that I always use. Would I ask that question from someone who is not part of that group? Yes?
Okay. I need your advice.
Okay.
As an activist, as a rabbi, as a trans woman.
Okay.
And I get questions like this fairly frequently. I am cisgender, so I'm speaking from outside the realm of trans. A person that I connect with on Facebook a lot wrote a few months ago, and it has stuck with me. He wrote, being trans is trendy. Transgenderism is not a preference like being gay, it's a delusion. What is your response for folks like me who do not see transgenderism as evil, but rather as a delusion to be helped or at a minimum not acknowledged? Frankly, I had no answer, and I'm hoping that you can help me out for future occasions.
Thank you. Well, as much as I hate that statement, that not you, but that statement that person made, it is fairly common. I think as Jews, it might be a bit easier to understand that, just to give a bit as an example, because people have said similar things. Like I read sometimes things that people say about trans people, and I'm like, you could literally replace that, and people would say almost the exact same thing about Jews. I've heard people say that Jews are just like not real, it's not a real religion, it's just like same like Christianity, just without Jesus, but you don't know what you're doing, and like, it's a delusion, all of those kind of things. And I think the second you start to put in perspective that it is not for me to tell people what is and isn't a delusion. Everything can be a delusion. You end up getting back to the like, I think, therefore I am. Maybe our entire lives are a delusion. Do we really live? Maybe everything is just a matrix. All of these are possibilities that if we were giving a philosophy class, maybe I would indulge it. But in reality, I think what people really don't, first of all, maybe you would think that being trans is trendy, and maybe it sounds like that, but I'm still yet to meet a trans person who would come up and tell me, I just did it because I was bored and it was so much fun. I mean, I just like love that like right now in several states I can't really pee, and that in other places I'm told that hormones that I need to really survive, my insurance can't cover it. I have not yet met a person who walked up to me and be like, this is why I did it. If by trendy they mean that people feel more comfortable coming out, I can tell you a long list of other things that is trendy. It's trendy to be Jewish. Probably for the first time in history, we can live in certain places where it's at least illegal to discriminate against us. Unfortunately, it still happens, but at least it's probably just trendy. It's trendy for people who have different abilities or disabilities to ask for their rights. And like now everyone wants elevators in like the subways. It's just, what they really, when I hear when you say trendy is like you are really upset that people are more comfortable to come out. But if anyone thinks that it's fun, I don't want to say I encourage, because I do not encourage anyone to do that, but just look up transgender, put it in the Twitter search or in the Facebook search, and put in transgender or don't do it if you don't want to, whatever. And you will see how trendy it is and how intense the hate is. No one does it because it's fun. And I think it is, the biggest response that I would have to that person isn't trendy. It is just slightly more acceptable than it ever was. And you really don't know how to deal with something you don't understand. Okay. I think we'll take one more question.
Well, I don't want to be the last one to ask a question, but I just
Well,
want
we
to
can do like you and one more.
So, my name is Micah. I'm a Jewish nerd. I know we've talked a lot about what's wrong with the community and misogyny and all that, and not understanding what we need to understand. In my time with you, I've never been with a descendant of one of the greatest Jewish thinkers. It's like, you know, Abraham Joshua Heschel, who everybody quotes, marched with King over the bridge in Selma, and he said, I felt as though my feet were praying. What a lot of people don't understand about Heschel is that he wasn't an activist because he was a political person. He was an activist because he was a learned Jew. And Rabbi Stein, and I will call you Rabbi, not Avi, yesterday when we were
I will
together,
tolerate it.
where you were whispering to my inner quest as a rabbi and a student of Judaism, such pearls in Yiddish and Hebrew about the Vishnitz, about your... by the way, she is related to Heschel.
Heschel was also, by the way, he actually came from a long, his father was a Hasidic Rabbi. He came from a long dynasty.
So I guess my question is, since it's still Shabbos, would you share with this community some of the pearls on your mind, in your hard drive? I wish I had your hard drive. None of us do. I don't know of anyone in the modern world who has what you have in your heart and soul, but also in your Jewish mind. So I'm not asking you to sing a nigun, but would you share some pearls with us, because no one else here has that in them.
I like that you bring that up. So actually what I want to do is I want to show one very specific source sheet. So this is available for anyone who wants online, but if we're talking about Hasidic teaching specifically, I'll just find that one specifically. So there are many here, and this is the one that I've shared before from the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. But I want to show some other ones, and one specifically that I love. These are all very interesting, but oh, is it not here? Damn it. Okay. I'm going to share another one that is here. So I like how you start to talk about the Hasidic movement, and I did only get to focus on, I guess, what some would call the negative parts of the Hasidic movement, though there are a lot of beautiful parts. I think the wider Jewish community and world as a whole has a lot to learn from them when it comes to charity. Maybe mine is the very conditions that they attach sometimes to it, but and so on. There are a lot of very positive parts and things about that community. But when it comes to Hasidic texts specifically, there's a quote from Martin Buber, where probably agree or disagree with that as a separate conversation, but he claimed that, he said, and I think it might be in here, he said, no renewal of Judaism is possible that does not bear in itself element of the Hasidic teachings. There's so many Hasidic teachings, and I can go on and talk for a very long time, but I want to share this text, and then I will tell one story, and hopefully that will give some of us a taste. This is a text from one of my favorite Hasidic books called the Kedushat Levi. It's Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev. He is known in Hasidic circles, he's called by the Aramaic term of Senegeron Shel Yisrael, the advocate, the lawyer of the Jews. He was known as a person who really would argue with God and get very upset. He would say things that, once again, today people would consider heresy, but he would really be like, how dare you, and like really talk to like the divine, and he wouldn't be nice, so to speak. But so this is one of the most powerful things that I think is an idea of which we should all maybe internalize. A basic principle in God's service. We believe in two Torahs, written and oral, both given by a single shepherd. The written Torah was given to us by Moses, God's faithful servant, in writing etched on tablets, black fire on white fire. The oral Torah was given to Moses in is its interpretation, including everything a faithful student is ever to discover. This means that the oral Torah is given to us essentially follows the interpretation of the tzaddikim of the generation. As they interpret the Torah, so it is. The great power has been given to us, and all the worlds follow their will in the Torah. This is based a lot on something that we already see in the Talmud, and Hasidic people talk a lot about it. Torah lo b'shamayim hi. One of my favorite stories in the Talmud goes that there was a dispute between two rabbis. It was more like a dispute between a rabbi and a whole group of rabbis. And they all said that the law follows according to the majority, so that's the law. And then there was a bat kol, a voice came out from heaven. And you have to understand, when the Talmud says a bat kol came out, the way they understand it is literally the voice of God, the closest thing to prophecy that they believed in, that still existed. And that voice said, no, the halacha, the law, is according to the opinion of Rabbi A, not according to the opinion of the majority. Do you know what the reaction to that is? Torah lo b'shamayim hi. The Torah is not in heaven. We don't care. The law is going to keep following those rabbis. And it's something that Hasidic teachings really, really dive into. If you come and tell me that God told you that this person, there was a Hasidic Rabbi who was a grandfather of mine, who used to say, whenever someone would come up to him and like, this person, it's a mitzvah to hate that person. It's a mitzvah it is a good deed to hate someone because God told me X, Y, and Z, or because this person is doing something wrong and I want to destroy them. Or the amount of times I've heard people saying, God hates LGBTQ people. And their reaction would be, I don't have to do every mitzvah. The ultimate reaction of, don't come with God in order to harm people. Because your interpretation is just wrong. Because they have this understanding that this power was given to us. The Talmud says in one place that if the rabbis decide, they're talking about specifically about cycles, and I'm not going to get into it because scientifically it probably doesn't necessarily hold up, but the idea that if the Jewish people decide something, even if it's contrary to what the Torah literally says, then God will go out of its way to change nature so it fits with what the people have decided. I'll say one final thing that I think is we're getting a bit close to the high holidays. And there was a story with the Baal Shem Tov, and he was traveling around a lot. One day he shows up in a small shtetl, and he sees a person who isn't very learned, doesn't understand any Hebrew. He sees that every day, for 3 times a day, he takes out a very thick prayer book and just says 10 pages of it. Says 10 pages, whether he could do Rosh Hashanah prayers in the middle of Pesach or just random, whichever 10 pages were in that prayer book, says 10 pages and puts in the note, puts it away. The next day, same thing, says a few pages of the prayer book with no rhyme or reason, no order. The Baal Shem Tov sits down with him and is like, listen, this is not how it works. There's a system. There's morning prayers, there's evening prayers, there's afternoon prayers, there are Shabbat prayers and holiday prayers. So he makes him this whole list and puts in like notes. You know, you put in a prayer book like, in the morning say this, Shabbat say that, and so on. And the Baal Shem Tov leaves. That night, as the story goes, and the Baal Shem Tov has a lot of stories of him making what's called an aliyat neshama, going up to heaven. And he tries to do his nightly studying that he said he would do with a prophet. I'm not going to go into what's really beyond all of these stories, but bear with me to grasp the idea of the story. And his teacher wouldn't teach him anything. And he's like, what's going on? And the teacher tells him, you should know that every day, the prayers of that person who has absolutely no clue what they're saying. They don't know what they're saying, they don't know what they're doing. They're doing it all wrong, as we would say. They're going to a synagogue with mixed seating, as my dad would say. They're doing it all wrong. That prayer had the strongest impact in heaven. It had a better impact than any other prayer because it was pure. It was done with the right intentions. And as long as you don't go back and make sure that that person keeps doing that, we're not going to teach you anything else. Now, whether exactly what that story happened or not, I think is beyond the point, but it's the message beyond it. And I think that is what is the most important thing that we need to keep in mind. That at the end of the day, it is what's inside, it is what the intentions are, and that is what we should focus on. We're going to end there. Thank you all. Just obviously, for some of you might know, but tomorrow,
Sure.
One more event tomorrow without Memphis.
On behalf of Rabbi Greenstein and everybody here at Temple Israel, I just want to thank you, Rabbi Abby Stein, so much for coming to Memphis, schlepping all the way down here from New York to share your Torah. And I said last night that the first time that we met somebody, this was actually, it's a miracle that this came through on a Zoom screen. Rabbi Stein was teaching my synagogue in New York through Zoom, and when she got off, somebody said, wow, we just saw a holy person. I think that all of us sitting here today and everybody who had a chance to learn from you this weekend can see that. And I think, Abby, that you are one of the leading lights in Judaism in our generation. And it's just such an honor to have you here in our synagogue. Thank you for teaching us. Thank you for giving us so much to strive for. And hopefully that we can continue to have things to be proud of. So thank you. I'm going to volunteer on behalf of Abby, maybe to give her a chance if she needs to use the restroom, but I know she offered to sign books. If you'd like to get your book signed, maybe just come up here and she'll come back in a moment.